The night my nephew arrived unexpectedly, I thought my quiet life was about to become inconvenient. I had no idea it was about to become complicated. For years, I had convinced myself that I liked living alone. My small house outside Boulder, Colorado, surrounded by pine trees and an old dirt road, had always felt like a safe place to disappear from the world. No noise, no questions, no one expecting anything from me. But lately, the silence felt different. I was 36, single and good at pretending I was completely happy with my life. My friends joked that I was married to my job. I laughed along with them. The truth was harder to admit. I wanted someone beside me. Someone I could be honest with. Someone who made me feel something I had spent years trying to ignore. That was when Evan came into my life. He was 25, confident, unpredictable, and impossible to forget. What started as a secret friendship slowly became something deeper. We never talked much about the future. We simply enjoyed the moments we had together. And that night, Evan was supposed to come over. I had spent the evening cleaning the living room and checking my phone every few minutes when it suddenly rang. My sister Rachel. She almost never called that late unless something had happened. "Hey Rachel, everything okay?" "I'm sorry to call you so suddenly," she said, "but I need a huge favor." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" "Daniel needs somewhere to stay for a few weeks. His college dorm closed unexpectedly because of repairs. I'm away for work and Mom's house is already packed. Could he stay with you?" I stared at the clock. "Tonight? Of all nights?" "Yeah," I finally said, "of course." Rachel sounded relieved. "Thank you, he's already heading your way. He should arrive in about an hour." I closed my eyes. An hour? My plans with Evan were suddenly gone. Still, Daniel was family. I couldn't turn him away. After we hung up, I stood alone in the living room, wondering whether I had made the right decision. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe I needed to slow down. But a small, selfish part of me still hoped Evan would come. Not because I wanted to risk everything. Because, for once, I didn't want to spend another night alone. Around 10, the house became quiet again. Then I heard 3 soft knocks at the back door. My heart immediately knew who it was. "Evan." I opened the door. He stood beneath the porch light wearing a dark jacket, his hair slightly messy from the cold wind. "Hey," he said with a familiar smile. "Hey." He stepped inside, and suddenly the house didn't feel empty anymore. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then he looked at me carefully. "You okay?" I nodded, even though he could clearly tell I wasn't. "Family situation," I explained. "My nephew is coming to stay here for a while." Evan's expression changed. "Oh. Yeah." There was an awkward silence. I expected him to leave. Instead, he stepped closer. "Then maybe we should just talk tonight." That surprised me. "Talk?" He smiled. "Yeah, maybe that's what we both need." We moved into the living room and sat across from each other. For the first time since we'd met, there was no rushing, no pretending, and no hiding behind jokes. Evan told me he was tired of keeping everything undefined. I admitted that I was scared of wanting something real. Then quietly he reached for my hand. I let him. It was such a simple gesture, but it hit me harder than I expected. "I don't want to be your secret forever," he said. I looked at him. "And I don't want to lose you." Before either of us could say more, headlights appeared through the window. A car stopped outside. Daniel had arrived. I quickly pulled my hand away. Evan stood. "Looks like your night just changed." I nodded. But as I watched him walk toward the door, I realized something. Maybe my biggest problem wasn't that someone was coming to stay with me. Maybe it was that someone had finally made me want to stop living alone. And now I had to decide whether I was brave enough to let him stay in my life. I thought the night was finally over. Then I heard the front door open. At first, I barely noticed it. There was the faint creak of the old hinges, followed by the quiet thud of a backpack near the stairs. I assumed Daniel had arrived and was settling in. I was wrong. A few minutes later, while Evan and I were still sitting close together in the living room, I noticed movement in the hallway. A shadow. Someone standing there. My heart stopped. I pulled myself upright and looked toward the entryway. Daniel stood frozen beneath the dim hallway light. His backpack hung from one shoulder, his face completely stunned. For several seconds none of us moved. He looked at Evan. Then at me. Then back at Evan. I could see the questions forming in his eyes. Evan reacted first. He stood quickly and reached for his jacket. I should go, he said quietly. He didn't wait for an answer. The front door closed behind him, leaving the house painfully silent. Now it was just Daniel and me. I wanted to explain everything, but every explanation sounded wrong. How could I explain years of hiding behind a life that looked perfectly normal from the outside? How could I explain that Evan had become important to me? Most importantly, how could I explain that I wasn't ashamed of who I was? Daniel looked away. I need some time, he said. Then he picked up his backpack and headed upstairs. His bedroom door closed softly. I stood alone in the living room, staring at the floor. The embarrassment was real, so was the fear. But beneath both of them was something unexpected. Relief. For years, I had been terrified that someone would discover the part of my life I had kept hidden. Now someone had. And somehow I still felt like myself. I changed clothes, turned off the lights and went upstairs to my own room. Sleep never came. The house felt different now. Every creak from the floorboards made me wonder what Daniel was thinking. Was he angry? Confused? Disappointed? I couldn't blame him for needing answers. But I also couldn't erase what had happened. And deep down, I realized I didn't want to erase it. For the first time, I was tired of apologizing for being honest about who I was. At 2:17 in the morning, I was still awake when I heard a quiet knock. I sat up. Another knock followed. Come in. The door opened slowly. Daniel stood there wearing a hoodie, his hands buried in the pockets. He looked nervous but calmer than before. Can we talk? He asked. I nodded and moved over, giving him a place to sit. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Daniel finally looked at me. I didn't know about you. I swallowed. I know. I wasn't expecting to see any of that tonight. Neither was I. He gave a small, uncertain laugh. I don't really know what I'm supposed to say. You don't have to say anything. He looked down at his hands. Then, after a long silence, he asked the question I had been dreading. Are you happy? The question caught me completely off guard. I thought about Evan. About the years I'd spent hiding. About the loneliness I'd mistaken for peace. Finally I nodded. Yeah, I said quietly, I think I finally am. Daniel studied my face for a few seconds. Then he nodded too. Okay. It wasn't a perfect answer. It wasn't forgiveness or understanding. But it was a beginning. And after the night I'd just survived, a beginning was more than enough. Finally Daniel spoke. I'm not angry. I looked at him, almost unable to believe what I'd heard. You're not. He shook his head and stared at the floor. I was shocked. I wasn't expecting any of this, but I'm not angry. I let out a slow breath. For hours I'd imagined every possible reaction: anger, disappointment, silence. I hadn't prepared myself for understanding. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I guess I just didn't expect this from you. I know, I said quietly. I spent a long time making sure nobody knew. He nodded. The room became quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel hostile. Then Daniel looked up. I understand the hiding. I frowned. What do you mean? He hesitated. I mean, I understand what it's like to keep something about yourself buried because you're scared of what people might think. His words caught me off guard. You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share, I said. He looked down at his hands. I've never told anyone. My chest tightened. Daniel. I think I like guys, he said quietly. I'm still trying to understand what that means for me. I don't know if I'm ready to tell Mom or anyone else. I leaned forward. You don't have to figure everything out tonight. His eyes became glassy. I was scared you'd think something was wrong with me. Never. I meant it. There is nothing wrong with you, and you don't owe anyone an explanation before you're ready. He wiped quickly at his eyes and gave a nervous laugh. You're really okay with this. I'm okay with you. That seemed to matter more than anything else I could have said. I stood and gave him some space instead of reaching for him. You can take your time, I continued. And whatever you decide, I'll support you, but we're going to keep some boundaries while you're staying here. You're my nephew and this is my home. I want you to feel safe here. Daniel nodded. Yeah, I understand. For the first time that night, some of the tension finally left his face. Thanks. Always. He stood and walked toward the door, then stopped. Uncle Ryan's. Yes. I'm glad it was you. I smiled. Me too. He left the room, closing the door gently behind him. I sat alone for a while, thinking about everything that had happened. I had spent years believing that being discovered would destroy my life. Instead, the truth had opened a door I never expected. Not toward romance. Not toward another secret. Toward honesty. The following days were different. Daniel was quieter at first, but he no longer seemed afraid to be around me. We talked over breakfast, argued about what to watch on television, and slowly settled into an ordinary routine. There were still awkward moments. Sometimes he'd start a conversation and stop halfway through. Sometimes I'd catch him thinking about something and decide not to push. I understood. He needed time. And so did I. One evening, we were sitting in the kitchen when Daniel finally spoke again. Do you think people really can accept you after you tell them? I looked at him. Some will, some might need time, and some may never understand. His expression fell slightly. But that doesn't mean you should spend your whole life pretending to be someone else. He nodded slowly. That's what I'm afraid of. I know. I reached across the table and gave his shoulder a brief, reassuring pat. But you're not alone anymore. For the first time since he'd arrived, Daniel smiled without forcing it. And I realized something. Sometimes the hardest secret isn't the one you're keeping from everyone else. It's the one you're terrified to admit to yourself. Daniel had taken his first step toward honesty. And watching him do it made me realize I needed to keep taking mine too. The hardest part wasn't what Daniel had discovered. It was realizing how long I had spent hiding from myself. 3 days later, everything finally came to a head. That evening, after dinner, Daniel and I sat on the back porch while the first drops of rain tapped against the railing. We talked for hours. He told me about college, his fears, and the things he'd never been brave enough to say out loud. I listened without judging him. Then my phone buzzed. It was Evan. Can we talk? I'm outside. My heart skipped. I looked toward the driveway and saw him standing beside his car, hands in his jacket pockets. Daniel followed my gaze. Go, he said with a small smile, I'll be fine. I nodded and stepped outside. Evan looked nervous when I approached. I almost didn't come, he admitted. Why? Because I thought you might regret everything. I looked at him for a long moment. I regret hiding, I said. I don't regret you. His expression softened. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he reached for my hand. His fingers slipped gently between mine. It was such a simple gesture, but after everything that had happened, it felt enormous. I missed you, he whispered. I missed you too. He smiled. Can I kiss you? I nodded. He leaned in and our lips met in a slow, gentle kiss. There was no rushing this time. No secrecy. No fear. Just two adults standing beneath a darkening sky, finally allowing themselves to be honest. When we pulled apart, Evan rested his forehead against mine. So what happens now? I smiled. Now we stop running. Behind us the porch light came on. Daniel stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He looked at us, smiled, and shook his head. You two really like dramatic conversations, don't you? I laughed. Evan laughed too. And somehow, the tension that had filled the house for days finally disappeared. That night didn't magically fix everything. Daniel still had questions. I still had fears. Evan and I still had a lot to figure out. But something had changed. I had spent years believing that being honest would destroy the life I'd built. Instead, honesty had given me the chance to build something better. Something real. Something I didn't have to hide. And as the rain finally began falling around us, I realized that maybe home was never supposed to be a place where you disappeared from the world. Maybe home was the place where you could finally be yourself. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had finally found mine.